Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of our Found Sound Beat Project walkthrough. So in this video I'm going to go through how to trim our sounds so that they're just the isolated drum hits that we want, how to process those sounds and edit them and manipulate them so that they sound more like our drums, and then how to turn that set of sounds into a usable software instrument that we can then play our beat on. So I'm going to start by closing out my media browser because I don't need that anymore. If I need more sounds, I'll go in there and grab them later. So I'm going to start by selecting one of my audio files. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. So you're going to double click on it, and that's going to bring up our editor. You can also access that by hitting E on your keyboard. And so then that's going to give us our sample. So I'm going to place so I see as I move my playhead here, it's just kind of a zoomed in view of this. So I want to isolate and trim it just where that bass, that hit happens. So right there, right where that waveform peaks, you can see where it happens. So what I'm going to do is if I move my mouse onto this region here, highlight that. If I hold it over the top half, it's just my cursor, it's just a pointer. If I hold it over the bottom half, I get those kind of crosshair looking things. So what I'm going to do is move my cursor to the bottom half to get it to the crosshairs, highlight just the thing that I want, which is just that one quick little bass hit, and then click again on the top. So that now has isolated my bass drum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo all that stuff and go through that again so you can see it. So and I'm also going to create one more track for audio, and I'm just going to name it Chops. So these are kind of my source files, and then the things that I chop out of that, the little section, the little clips that I chop out of that, I'm going to put down here in this Chops track. Say that 10 times fast. So I'm going to highlight just that little peak in the waveform, click on it up top. So bottom half to highlight, top half to trim it. And then I'm just going to drag that down into my chops. And I'm going to repeat that process for all of these different files. So now I'm moving on to my pen tap, which I'm going to use as a snare. So again, I find right where it starts, so I can zoom in a little bit. You can zoom using this button here. I'm using my trackpad to do that. So I'm going to find right where that transient starts and get a little bit of it, and maybe about that much. Click up top to trim it, then move it down to my chops. So that's going to be a nice little snare sound. Here is our chair. Let's see what I want to do with this guy. Well, that's a nice little tom-tom kind of sound. So what I think I might do is chop all of those little taps and see which ones I like best. So I'm just kind of, like I said, I'm scrolling through. I am trimming. I'm highlighting rather with the crosshairs, and then clicking to trim. So I can drag those down into my next track. Maybe I'll grab one more of those. They're all kind of the same. But I can play around with that later on and pitch shift some of them so I can get some different tom-tom kind of drum sounds. So let's move on to our hi-hat. So this one's going to be a little more tricky. So I got to zoom. I'm zoomed pretty far out. So I'm just going to grab one of these little kind of peaks in the waveform, and use that. Drag that down. And let's see what we have over here. This one might work a little better as a hi-hat, but I'll grab them both and see what happens. Yeah, that's gonna I think gonna be nice. So highlight, click, drag down. So that is the process of chopping my samples. So I've got my source files up here. I went through. I used the trim function to highlight and cut it up into pieces that I can use. And now if I go down to this track here. I'm going to hide all these ones that I don't need anymore and just work with this track. I'm also going to mute all these extra tracks here as well. So I'm just now working with this piece. So what I'm going to do is just kind of move everything a little closer together so it's easier to work with. So now let's go through and listen to these sounds that we have captured. So we've gone through the process of importing our sounds, finding our sounds, bringing them into a track, chopping them to be usable as drum hits, and now we're just going to listen to where we are so far. So that's a good start. So now what I'm going to do, this is the bit where it gets a little finicky. So I'm going to highlight everything, right click, and convert to new sampler track. And so what I'm going to do is if I have a keyboard in front of me, I'm just going to click on where it says trigger note range. I'm just going to hit my first, the leftmost note on my keyboard. That way it's going to put it in a place on my keyboard where I can use it nicely, and make sure it's selected by regions, not transient markers. So create zones from regions. The regions are the individual little clips. We make sure we have C1 selected, or whatever the leftmost note on our keyboard is. So I'm going to hit C2, I believe. Come on. There we go. And then have that just go all the way to the right. So the leftmost and the rightmost note on our keyboards. We hit OK. And here we are. So here I'm playing. I'm using MIDI to trigger those sounds. So I'm using MIDI. That kick drum note is assigned to that first note that I picked on my keyboard. That snare sound is assigned to the next note up. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sounds, 6 different regions. So that corresponds to these guys right here. So that's going to leave it. That's going to do us for part 2 of this video series. So again, we went through the process of chopping our samples, or chopping our source files down to usable drum hits, trimming those clips down to manageable lengths, and then converting that to a new sampler track. And in part 3, we're going to go through how to manipulate this MIDI instrument and kind of play around with some of these sounds by going into the instrument editor. So, hope you found this informative. See you in the next part. Bye.